Japanese troops called the Colt 45 slow and outdated. They laughed at America's sidearm until the first shot echoed through the jungle. In the hands of U.S. Marines, the M1911 dropped enemies with a single round, earning a fearsome reputation across the Pacific. This is the untold story of how a pistol turned mockery into fear and became a legend of World War II. The Pacific, 1942. The jungle is thick, the air heavy with heat and fear. American Marines move cautiously through the undergrowth, sweat stinging their eyes, rifles at the ready. In the distance, Japanese soldiers wait, confident and alert. They have heard the rumors about the Americans, big men, slow, weighed down by heavy gear and even heavier pistols. The Japanese troops laugh among themselves, mocking the American sidearm. The Colt 45, they say, is old, clumsy, and no match for the speed and discipline of the Imperial Army. But the laughter will not last. The story of the Colt M1911. 45 ACP begins decades earlier, in the aftermath of another war, the Philippine-American War. American troops, fighting Moro insurgents in the jungles of Mindanao, found that their standard-issue .38 revolvers lacked the stopping power needed in close combat. The Army called for a new pistol, one that could drop an enemy with a single shot. The result was John Browning's masterpiece, the Colt M1911, chambered in .45 ACP, a sidearm that would become a legend. By the time the United States entered World War II, the Colt 45 was standard issue for officers, NCOs, and anyone who might find themselves in a foxhole or a jungle ambush. It was heavy, over 2 pounds loaded, and its magazine held just 7 rounds. But it was reliable, simple to use, and packed a punch that no other military pistol could match. The Japanese, by contrast, carried the Nambu pistol. Lighter, with a smaller 8mm round, the Nambu was easy to carry but notorious for its weak stopping power and tendency to jam. Japanese officers prized their swords and rifles, seeing the pistol as a symbol of rank more than a weapon of war. Many believed that the American .45 was a relic, a cowboy's gun, unsuited for the modern battlefield. That belief would be shattered in the jungles of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima. The first encounters were brutal. In the close quarters of the Pacific Islands, firefights often came down to seconds and inches. Marines and soldiers found themselves face to face with Japanese troops in bunkers, caves, and night raids. Rifles were too long, bayonets too slow. In those moments, the Colt 45 became the weapon of survival. Veterans would later recall the shock on the faces of Japanese soldiers when the 45 roared. One Marine remembered, "They thought it was a joke, until the first man dropped. After that, they stopped laughing." The 45's heavy bullet, moving at nearly 900 feet per second, could punch through thick clothing, web gear, and even light cover. In the chaos of a banzai charge or a desperate hand-to-hand fight, a single shot could mean the difference between life and death. The story spread quickly. Japanese prisoners began to talk about the American pistol with a new respect and a new fear. Some units warned their men to avoid close combat with Marines, to keep their distance and rely on grenades and bayonets, but the jungle had its own rules. Sooner or later, every soldier found himself in a fight where only the fastest and the deadliest would survive. The Colt 45 became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of American resolve. Officers carried it in leather holsters, pilots strapped it to their thighs, and tank crews kept it within arm's reach. In the mud and rain, the 45 kept working. It fired when wet, when dirty, when dropped in the sand. It was simple to strip and clean, and its design was so robust that it could take abuse that would ruin other pistols. The Japanese, for all their discipline and courage, could not match the stopping power of the 45. The Nambu, with its small round and delicate springs, was no match for the American sidearm. In firefights, Japanese soldiers sometimes emptied their magazines without stopping a determined Marine. The 45, by contrast, ended fights with a single well-placed shot. The legend grew with every battle. On Saipan, a Marine officer used his 45 to stop a charging enemy at point-blank range. On Okinawa, a wounded corpsman defended himself against a bayonet attack, firing his last round as the enemy fell at his feet. In the skies over the Pacific, downed pilots used the 45 to fight off capture, sometimes holding out for days until rescue arrived. The Colt 45 was not perfect. Its recoil was heavy and its magazine small. Some soldiers found it hard to shoot accurately under stress, but those who learned to use it, who practiced their draw and their aim, swore by it. The 45 became a badge of honor, a mark of the American fighting man. The Japanese learned to respect the pistol they had once mocked. In captured diaries and letters, they wrote of the big American gun that could kill with a single shot. Some units began to collect 45s from the battlefield, using them as trophies or even as weapons for their own officers. The laughter was gone, replaced by caution, and sometimes by fear. The story of the Colt 45 in the Pacific is a story of adaptation, of learning, and of survival. It is the story of how a weapon designed for another war became the tool of victory in a new and brutal conflict. It is the story of how American ingenuity, determination, and firepower turned mockery into respect, and respect into legend. The battles raged on, island after island, and the legend of the Colt 45 only grew. In the dense jungles of New Guinea, the tangled caves of Peleliu, and the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, American troops learned to trust their sidearm as much as their rifle. The 45 was always close at hand, strapped to a hip, tucked into a boot, or tied to a pack with a length of parachute cord. For many, it was the last line of defense when all else failed. The Japanese tactics of infiltration and night attack made the pistol even more vital. Under cover of darkness, small groups of Japanese soldiers would slip through the lines, seeking to sow chaos and terror. In the confusion, firefights erupted at arm's length. Marines and soldiers, startled awake or caught in a foxhole, reached for their 45s. The heavy pistol, with its simple controls and powerful round, was made for such moments. 1 or 2 shots, and the threat was ended. Stories from the front lines spread quickly. On Bougainville, a Marine sergeant held off a banzai charge with his Colt, firing until the slide locked back and the enemy lay still. On Leyte, an Army lieutenant used his 45 to defend a wounded comrade, dropping 3 attackers in as many seconds. In the Philippines, a Navy pilot shot his way out of an ambush after crashing behind enemy lines, the 45 his only weapon until rescue arrived. The Japanese, who had once laughed at the American pistol, now treated it with wary respect. Some began to scavenge 45s from the battlefield, preferring them to their own Nambu pistols. The Nambu, with its small caliber round and fragile design, was no match for the stopping power and reliability of the Colt. Japanese officers who carried captured 45s were envied by their men, and some even tried to modify their holsters to fit the larger American weapon. The Hod 45's reputation was not just built on its power, but on its reliability. In the mud and rain of the Pacific, many weapons jammed or failed. The Colt, with its loose tolerances and robust construction, kept firing. It could be dropped in the sand, dunked in a stream, or buried in a foxhole, and still work when needed. Soldiers and Marines learned to field strip and clean their pistols in the dark, keeping them ready for the next fight. The bond between American troops and their 45s was personal. Many gave their pistols nicknames, decorated the grips with carvings or tape, and carried them long after regulations said they should be turned in. Letters home spoke of the comfort of having a 45 close by, of the confidence it gave in the face of danger. For some, the pistol was a lucky charm. For others, it was a reminder of the friends they had lost and the battles they had survived. The 45 also became a symbol of American resolve. In propaganda leaflets and newsreels, the pistol was shown as the weapon of the tough, resourceful GI, the image of a Marine or paratrooper. 45 in hand became an icon of the Pacific War. But the pistol's power was not just physical, it was psychological. Japanese troops trained to believe in their own superiority were shaken by the stories of the 45's effectiveness. Some began to avoid close combat with Americans, preferring to attack from a distance or at night. The fear of the 45 and the men who carried it became a weapon in itself. The Colt 45 was not without its critics. Some officers argued that the pistol was too heavy, that its recoil made it hard to shoot accurately, or that its 7-round magazine was too small for modern combat. but the men who used it in battle knew its worth. They practiced their draw, learned to reload quickly, and trusted the pistol to do its job when it mattered most. As the war dragged on, the .45's legend spread beyond the Pacific. In Europe, paratroopers and tank crews carried the pistol into Normandy, the Ardennes, and the streets of Berlin. In North Africa, rangers and commandos used it in raids and ambushes. The .45 became the sidearm of choice for anyone who expected to fight up close and personal. By 1945, the laughter that had greeted the Colt .45 was gone. Japanese troops, once so confident, now faced the reality of American firepower and determination. The .45 had become a symbol of the new kind of war, a war fought in jungles and caves in foxholes and ruins, where survival depended on speed, skill, and the ability to end a fight with a single shot. The story of the Colt .45 in World War II is a story of adaptation, resilience, and the power of a simple tool in the hands of determined men. It is a story of how a weapon designed for another era became the key to victory in a new and brutal conflict. It is a story of how American troops turned mockery into fear, and fear into respect. As the Pacific Campaign entered its bloodiest phase, the Colt .45 became more than just a sidearm. It became a lifeline. On Iwo Jima, Marines crawled through volcanic ash and shattered rock, fighting for every inch against an enemy determined to die rather than surrender. In the maze of tunnels and bunkers, the .45 was often the only weapon that could be brought to bear in the tightest spaces. Marines cleared caves with grenades and flamethrowers, but when the fight came down to a sudden rush or a desperate grapple, it was the .45 that decided who lived and who died. On Okinawa, the last and largest battle of the Pacific, the fighting was even more intense. Rain turned the ground to mud, and the air was thick with the smell of cordite and death. Japanese soldiers launched night attacks, infiltrating American lines and striking at command posts and aid stations. In the confusion, officers and medics reached for their .45s, firing at shadows, trusting the heavy slug to stop an attacker in his tracks. The stories from Okinawa became legend, of a chaplain defending wounded men with a .45, of a cook who shot his way out of an ambush, of a wounded Marine who held off a banzai charge with his last magazine. The Japanese, who had once dismissed the American pistol as a relic, now saw it as a symbol of American tenacity. Captured diaries and letters spoke of the big gun that could kill with a single shot. Some Japanese officers, desperate for an edge, ordered their men to collect .45s from the battlefield, to use them in close combat or as trophies of war. The Nambu, once a mark of status, was now seen as a liability, a weapon that might jam or fail when it was needed most. The Colt .45's reputation spread beyond the battlefield. War correspondents wrote stories of its power and reliability. Hollywood made it a star, showing GIs and Marines drawing their pistols in the heat of battle, saving the day with a single well-aimed shot. The .45 became part of the American myth, a symbol of rugged individualism and the will to win. But the reality was more complex. The .45 was not a magic weapon. It required training, discipline, and nerve to use effectively. In the chaos of combat, even the best marksman could miss, and a pistol was no substitute for a rifle or a machine gun. Yet, when the chips were down, when the enemy was close enough to see the whites of his eyes, the .45 was the weapon that made the difference. Veterans remembered the feel of the pistol in their hand, the weight of it, the way it kicked and roared. They remembered the moments when it saved their lives, or the lives of their friends. They remembered the fear in the eyes of the enemy, the sudden silence when a fight was over, the relief of knowing they had survived another day. The .45 also became a symbol of equality on the battlefield. In the foxhole, rank and background mattered less than courage and skill. Officers and enlisted men alike trusted the pistol, shared tips on shooting and maintenance, and swapped stories of close calls and narrow escapes. The .45 was a great equalizer, a tool that gave every man a fighting chance. As the war drew to a close, the legend of the Colt .45 was secure. In Tokyo Bay, as American sailors watched the Japanese surrender, many had their .45s holstered at their sides, a silent reminder of the battles they had fought and the friends they had lost. The pistol that had once been mocked was now a symbol of victory. After the war, the Colt 45 returned home with the men who had carried it. Some kept their pistols as souvenirs, passing them down to sons and grandsons. Others turned them in, trading the tools of war for the promise of peace. But the stories remained, of jungle fights and midnight raids, of courage and survival, of a weapon that had earned its place in history. The Japanese, too, remembered the 45. In post-war memoirs and interviews, former soldiers spoke of their surprise and respect for the American pistol. The laughter, they said, was gone, replaced by a grudging admiration for the weapon and the men who used it. The Colt 45 had done more than win battles. It had changed minds, shattered myths, and become a legend in its own time. It was proof that sometimes the simplest tools are the most effective, and that in the end, it is the will to fight and the courage to stand your ground that decides the outcome of war. The war ended, but the legend of the Colt 45 lived on. In the years that followed, veterans gathered at reunions and around kitchen tables, telling stories of the pistol that had saved their lives. The 45 became a symbol not just of victory, but of survival, brotherhood, and the hard lessons learned in the jungles and on the beaches of the Pacific. In museums and collections across America, battered M1911s sat in glass cases, their grips worn smooth by the hands of men who had carried them through hell and back. Some were engraved with names, units, or battles: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each pistol told a story, not just of war, but of the men who had trusted it when everything else failed. The Colt 45 also left its mark on military doctrine. The lessons of the Pacific, of close combat, of the need for stopping power, of the value of a reliable sidearm, shaped the way the U.S. military thought about weapons for decades to come. The M1911 remained in service through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, its reputation growing with every new generation of soldiers and Marines. For the Japanese, the memory of the 45 was a reminder of the cost of underestimating an enemy. In post-war Japan, veterans spoke with respect of the American pistol and of the men who carried it. The laughter that had once greeted the sight of the heavy, old-fashioned sidearm was gone, replaced by a sober understanding of its power and the determination of those who used it. The Colt 45 became a part of American culture. It appeared in movies, on television, and in the hands of heroes and villains alike. It was the pistol of lawmen and outlaws, of cowboys and soldiers, of anyone who needed a weapon they could trust. The phrase Colt 45 became shorthand for reliability, power, and American grit. But for those who had carried it in war, the 45 was more than a symbol. It was a companion, a protector, and sometimes the difference between life and death. Veterans remembered the weight of it on their hip, the feel of the grip in their hand, the sound of the slide racking back, and the finality of a shot fired in anger or desperation. The story of the Colt 45 is a story of adaptation and resilience. It is the story of how a weapon designed for a different war became the tool of victory in a new and brutal conflict. It is the story of how American troops, faced with an enemy who laughed at their weapons, turned mockery into fear and fear into respect. Today, the M1911 is still revered by collectors, shooters, and soldiers around the world. Its design has changed little in more than a century, a testament to the genius of John Browning and the needs of the men who carried it. The 45 remains a symbol of American resolve, a reminder that sometimes the simplest tools are the most effective, and that in the end, it is the courage and determination of those who wield them that shapes the course of history. The laughter that once echoed through the jungles of the Pacific is silent now. In its place is the memory of a pistol, a war, and the men who proved that when the moment comes, one shot can change everything.